Good morning. I'm Harley Schlanger from the LaRouche organization with your daily update for December 30th, 2020. What I want to discuss today is what is the leading issue which is shaping the fights ahead. That is the battle against British Malthusian genocide. This is why it's essential to continue the fight for an honest account of the vote. Because on the one side, you have a Biden administration committed to the British Malthusian genocidal policy of the Green New Deal. And on the other side, you have Donald Trump, who is committed to restoring, in some level, the American system. And we have to fight to make sure that the real American system is what emerges from this battle that's taking place. Now, U.S. history is defined by leaps and advances in productivity as a result of scientific discovery and the technological innovation that comes from advances in science, as well as an education system which develops a workforce, a labor force, which is capable of assimilating new technology. That's where the increase in productivity comes from. Productivity, as defined by Lyndon LaRouche, is not a monetary value, but it's an increase in the rate of growth of capital goods production per capita, what he calls physical economy, which he got as a concept from Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz, who had a very significant impact, whose philosophy and scientific work had an impact on Ben Franklin and the founders of the American Republic. What LaRouche described as the machine tool principle is the means by which new technologies are brought online and then assimilated so that real value can be added to the economy through the productive process. Now, where did this come from? This is what's known as the American system. And the most significant author of this idea was Alexander Hamilton, who worked extremely closely with George Washington. He had been a protege of Benjamin Franklin and an absolute opponent of the British system, including the idea of that the British brought to the Americas of slavery and a national bank. Hamilton was opposed to the idea of a private national bank as they had with the Bank of England. Now, his policies were set forth in 3 reports delivered to the Congress. The first in January 1790, the report on public credit. The second, at the end of the year, December 1790, the report on the National Bank. These 2 reports defined a credit policy which would be, whose purpose of which was to fund physical economy. And Hamilton, in these discussions, talked about how you could make debt or a credit system a national blessing. But he said, never take on a debt without the means to extinguish it. That doesn't mean he was opposed to credit. It means he was committed to directing credit to areas where you will have an increase in productivity, increase in the value added to the economic productive process, so that you can not only retire the debt, but you have a surplus that can be invested for the future. And this was made more explicit in December 1791 in his report on the subject of manufactures. And what he argues in this one was against the British idea, which was being brought into the United States by Thomas Jefferson, of the American economy as primarily an agrarian economy. And what Hamilton said is that, well, the full development of agriculture is important. It's through manufacturing that real value is added, including in agriculture. And for him, this was a whole system. It included the means to move the products, which was through infrastructure, port development, canals, roads, bridges, and connecting that with the need to produce a surplus domestically to take care of the American needs, but also to have a capability for trade. Now, his argument was primarily against not just the Jeffersonians, but the reflection in the Jeffersonians of the British system, the system of Adam Smith, as set forward in his Wealth of Nations, which was a polemic against the ideas of Franklin and Hamilton. Smith's argument was buy cheap, sell dear, essentially a trader's approach. that you should make money by having cheap labor, by having cheap production processes, and then you raise the prices based on a so-called market valuation. And who benefits from that? Private interests, the people who are already wealthy. This is an argument that the British East India Company developed, which was for free trade, and this is what today's free traders are calling for, making money through trading. Today it's speculation. The neoliberals have always been focused on money and monetary value as opposed to physical value. So for them, money made through speculation, whether it's through derivatives, foreign exchange, trading, or so on, trading worthless instruments back and forth based on free liquidity from the central bank, that's a profit which for them justifies the process. But that takes away from credit that's necessary for the physical production to advance the system as a whole. Now, then you have the additional factor. It was combined with the Malthusian argument, and Malthus worked for the British East India Company, at least implicitly. The argument was there are too many people, too little food. The iron law of food production, of population. And what Malthus said is that population grows geometrically, food production arithmetically, so you're always going to have more people than the ability to take care of them. Well, this is why we had the Irish potato famine. This is why the British imposed on their empire starvation policies, as in India on several occasions. The British were interested in trade for the sake of the profit of the trading companies, not for the good of either the producers in England or in the colonies where they were stealing the wealth. So this idea of the British system has always been a monetary system based on cheap labor, cheap raw materials, and population reduction. The British system, not surprisingly, was the slave system. It was the system that developed the concept of eugenics, in a sense appropriating Darwin to argue that it's a struggle for the survival of the fittest, including among humans, treating human beings as jungle animals, as opposed to those capable of creative ideas, which, if funded, can increase the abundance for all. Now, the modern version of this is man-made climate change, the use of the phony science around carbon to say that we have to get rid of energy-intense systems and replace them with low-intense energy production, which cannot sustain a population on this planet. It would not allow for the production of the necessary products that are needed to sustain the population. The carbon hoax is a scientific fraud, and yet this is what's being brought in now with the would-be Biden administration as the basis of economic policy. Population reduction using the Paris Climate Accord. Now, President Trump correctly pulled the United States out of the Paris Accord, and the president is in favor of investment in new energy-intense productive capabilities, investment in space programs, fusion power, precisely as specified by Lyndon LaRouche in his fourth law of the four laws. On the other side, you have Prince Charles. You have Mark Carney, formerly the head of the Bank of England, Sir Michael Bloomberg, the whole Davos crowd, the big tech companies who are pushing for this great reset to pour credit into the so-called green economy, to create a green financial bubble, while dismantling what's left of the advanced physical economy of the Western world. The bankers' push for the Green New Deal is nothing but that. Control by the central banks over every aspect of monetary and economic policy, including spending, for the sake of sustaining an unsustainable debt bubble while reducing the population globally. This is the old battle, the British system versus the American system. And there will be a conference coming up toward the end of January of the World Economic Forum to push this ahead in conjunction with what they expect will be the inauguration of Joe Biden and the commitment of the new administration to a Green New Deal. The British are counting on the Biden administration. Now, the next issue of the Executive Intelligence Review will have some articles on what the British system meant in the past in terms of the starvation policies and famine in India. And it's not surprising that with the International Monetary Fund and the Brits in control of the City of London in control of the global financial system, we now face starvation of biblical proportions in Africa. It's the role of the American system to show how this fraud can be overcome by an emphasis on an investment in the creation of new technologies, the development of a labor force, improving standards of nutrition, of healthcare, of education, so that we can produce the supplies necessary to increase the standard of living for a growing population. That's LaRouche's conception of potential relative population density. And that's what the fight the last 4 years has been. It's not always been so clear from President Trump, but in general outline, his opposition to Paris was key to this. His opposition to British free trade was key to this. And that's why the forces behind Joe Biden did everything they could to impeach him, to run him out of office, and to carry out large volume of election theft to make sure he was not given a second term. There's still a chance to fight for that. But most importantly, we must fight for it on the right basis. The American system of Lyndon LaRouche must be revived, which goes back to Hamilton and our founding fathers, against the British Empire, which is still the enemy of America today. So thanks for joining me, and I'll be back again tomorrow.